right, good morning, everybody. It's good to see everybody today. Let me just go ahead and warn you, I'm driving solo this morning. Aunt Tammy and Mama are in Rocky Mount with one of the Starnes children. I think the Starneses are in Charleston with another of the children. The other three, I'm really not sure where they're going to be. That's one of the advantages of being empty nested when your children are grown. And then you also have sisters-in-law, brother-in-laws that still have younger children. You get to play with them, have a good time, drive them everywhere, do a thing, and then send them back home. I have a T-shirt that I got for Christmas that I've always wanted. It says Funkle, because I seem to be the uncle that Tina especially and Carissa, they're usually looking at me like, Peter. So I do have to be careful. I get them and myself in trouble this morning. So I'm going to try to follow the chat box as best I can this morning as we study together. But again, good morning. It is good to see everybody. I hope your day is starting off well. Beautiful day outside here. Enjoyed taking Campbell outside and walking through and just listening. Lots of birds coming. Lots of things starting to bloom now. Looking at trees and plants and grass and weeds, of course, all of that coming up. So just a beautiful morning, and I hope yours is starting out that way too. Let me ask you, if you do have praise reports or prayer concerns that you'd like to share, please put them in the chat box this morning, and I will try my best to keep up with those. And just as a reminder, where we're going in the next little while, next Sunday is Palm Sunday. And so we prepare ourselves as Jesus moves into Jerusalem and as he begins to encounter and confront the religious leaders during that week, leading up to his arrest, the trial, his death, his resurrection on Easter Sunday. And so here's the plan. I've put together a reading for each day starting next Sunday. We will be in John chapter 12 next Sunday. Studying here, but then a reading for you to do every day of the week. And then each evening around 7:30, I will come online for about 5 or 10 minutes just to summarize that particular day, especially from the viewpoint of the disciples as they're watching, because I hope that you have seen, I hope that you, don't you hate when something gets on your face, on your mouth like that? I hope that you have seen that as we have studied these various encounters that Jesus has had in John, that the intensity is building, right? As he encounters, every time he does something, it makes the religious leaders angrier than they were before. And we'll see that today, especially in the story with Lazarus. This seems to become that pinnacle, that apex, that place where they say this is the straw that broke the camel's back. And so all throughout that week in Jerusalem, what was going through the disciples' minds? Jesus had said a lot of things to them in these past 3 years, and especially in the last 6 months as they were making their way towards Jerusalem. Jesus knows what's happening and where he's going. And he's been saying things along the way to the disciples, okay? And so what's going on in their hearts? Because we have the benefit of hindsight and reading backwards, because we know after the resurrection, it all became clear, and that became their motivation, to take the gospel into all parts of the world. But during that week, what was that like? And how did Jesus prepare them? How did he comfort? What did he say? What did he do? And so we'll spend some time Monday night, Tuesday night, Wednesday night, and Thursday night for about 5 or 10 minutes each night, just summarizing the day. And so the goal will be that you'll read sometime during the day the passages that I've got, and it's just describing what's taking place each day. And then we'll summarize together and have a time of prayer in preparation for the trial, for the beating, his death, And then in preparation, especially for Easter Sunday morning, and how that changes the course of history, how that changes the history for the world, how that changes things for me and for you. So if you'd like a copy of that reading, just please put that in the comment box. I've got an email list for my Sunday school class that I'll send it out to as well. But if you'd like a copy of that, please make sure you put your email in the chat box so that I will know to send it to you. And I will get those sent out one day this week. Okay. Excuse me. Sorry about that. So again, thank you. And then once we finish with Easter, we'll probably do a couple of Sundays, 1 or 2 Sundays as follow-up, as far as what Jesus said to his disciples to do after the resurrection. And then we will start into the book of Ecclesiastes, studying that together. And that's a powerful book. And it's beautiful that it follows Easter, right? Because the primary point that I see, and scholars agree upon Ecclesiastes, is it's living in light of eternity. And we'll talk some about that today, but just keep that in mind. If you want to go ahead and start reading Ecclesiastes, because it is one of those weird books, right? The way that Solomon kind of puts all that together, you're like, wow, what's he talking about when he does that? So but go ahead and get yourself ready as we study that. And let's get our hearts together this morning and spend some time in prayer together. A couple of things that I'm aware of. And again, if you have prayer concerns, praise reports, please put them in the chat box, comment box, so that we can know what they are. Robin McCall continues to do well, improving. And I know I, again, saw a social media post this week where he's extremely grateful to those who have reached out and helped, bought meals, just stopped by and said hello, all those cool things. And so keep Robbie in your prayers in the days ahead, that he gets his strength back and that life can be back to normal as it can be for him. I think particularly, I think he misses probably the classroom. Robbie was one of those excellent teachers that impacted a lot of students. And he truly was called to that and truly accepted that calling fully. And I know he misses that. So keep him in your prayers. My coworker Jennifer is back at work, working slowly again, but keep her in your prayers as she continues her recovery. Also, last week, I think, or the week before, we mentioned that a coworker of Tammy's, Jessica Phillips, her mom had been diagnosed with pretty advanced cancer. Tammy got word yesterday morning that her mom had passed and that she died early yesterday morning. So keep Jessica in your prayers. She had been able to spend the last 2 weeks pretty much at her mom's side the entire time, just comforting and being there. So be with Jessica and her family as they remember her mom in the days ahead. And I don't know much about this one, but I did see this morning as I was scrolling through some social media that Jeff Wright posted that his dad had to be taken to the hospital, I think sometime yesterday or late during the night. Not real sure what's going on with that yet, but please keep Jeff in your prayers and their entire family. His dad lives in Georgia, so Jeff's kind of struggling, but we all, when we don't live near our parents, being that far away and not much you can do. So just keep him in your prayers. If they can find out what's going on and some healing can take place. So again, thank you for joining us. Let's spend some time in prayer together, and a lot of stuff going on. I was reminded this weekend of that, a lot of stuff going on with our family, kind of scattered as they are in different places. And so just, I think especially with Easter coming, if there's anything I've learned from the pandemic, it's okay to stop. It's okay to slow down and to do it differently. And to not feel like we have to do everything, And my prayer is, as I watch, I see more people being vaccinated. I see the numbers coming down as far as new positives, numbers coming down as far as those going into the hospital. More and more places lifting restrictions and making access much easier and people being able to spend more time together. in our enthusiasm and in our excitement to be able to be back together again, especially in public gatherings, whether it's at church or at work or back at school full time or just wherever, just going out with friends to a restaurant. Um, let's not forget what we've learned over the last year. Um, that simplicity is beautiful, less is more, and we truly don't have to do it all. And so let's be careful and intentional to not get caught back up in the trap of busyness. It's one of the things I've truly given God a lot of praise for over the last year is how this pandemic, more than anything, has reminded us we were way too busy. We were way too involved because, yeah, we missed being together, but I believe part of the angst too is that we weren't busy, and it forced us to put a mirror up and kind of reevaluate and to refocus, and some of us didn't like it very much because the busyness can mask sometimes our insecurities or our sin. So let's be intentional as restrictions ease. Again, to not fall back into that same trap. What can I do without? Is it truly necessary? The things that I want to do, the busyness that I had before. And talk to each other about it. Sometimes it's difficult for me to see in my life the busyness of things. I tend to think, well, everything in my life is important, right? Maybe not. Why is it important? And I think that's a big question to ask is, why do I feel the need to do all these things? I know for me, sometimes it comes down to being fully surrendered to Christ. I like to be in control, so I go do all these things, right? God says, no, you don't have to do that. So keep that in our hearts and prayers in the days ahead. But let's pray together as we start together this morning. Father, again, as I got up this morning and took Campbell out and made some coffee and breakfast, just sat down, continued to look outside as I read and studied. Father, it seemed like this morning there were more. Maybe it's because it's the second day of spring or close to spring, I don't know. But Father, it certainly seemed like there were more voices in the trees today. Different birds singing and chattering and talking back and forth today. And it seems over the last several days that more plants are beginning to turn green again. Grass seems to be coming up and weeds catching up with them and trying to get ahead of that. But Father, I think it's beautiful that Easter comes at this time of year because we have those physical reminders that you're in charge. And I'm so grateful for that, Father. It's just to see your power like that, to see how all that just plays together. I can't help but sit in awe, and I'm so grateful for that, Father. And I pray that in the days ahead, that I would not lose sight of that, Father. I think especially as the pandemic hopefully begins to decrease some, as vaccinations happen, fewer people are testing positive, Father. It seems like potentially getting a grip on it. I just pray, Father, that mornings like today where we hear the birds singing, we see the grass and plants beginning to come back to life, that would become the norm. That we would stop and truly enjoy everything that you have put in our life, Father. From nature to people to places, Father, most of all, you. And so my sincere prayer, Father, for the days ahead is as the pandemic lifts and as restrictions are eased, Father, that we would not get back to the same old, that we would not be in such a hurry to busy ourselves with so much stuff and so many things that we lose sight again of who you are and what you've called us to be. Father, I also pray for some specific folks this morning. I think especially of Tammy's friend Jessica. Just 2-3 weeks ago, got the word from doctors that there's cancer, and then her mom makes the hard decision to not seek any treatment because it is so advanced. And being by her side the last several weeks. I pray, Father, that more than anything, that you would draw Jessica close to your heart. Just let her feel your heartbeat as you hold her close, Father. Give her endurance and peace in the days ahead as she makes plans. Father, may people like Tammy and other co-workers and friends and others gather around her and be your arms and your feet and your hands and your tears, Father. Yeah. And Father, I lift up Jeff Wright's dad. Not sure what's going on, but I pray for healing, Father. And Father, for peace in Jeff's heart and his brother's heart as they just have to wait and hear what's going on. Thank you again for the healing and Robert McCall for watching over him. I pray for that continued healing, Father. And I also thank you for the healing that we've seen in Jennifer as she's continuing to rehab and recover. I pray for strength as she moves forward, Father, and patience in her heart. And Father, more than anything, as we study today, may we just understand that you are right here and that you've got a plan and that we don't have to be in control of it, Father. We don't have to be calling the shots. And if we would truly surrender it to you, not where we're just sitting back being lazy, Father, but we surrender the outcomes to you. We do the things that you put in front of us, Father, and we keep moving forward and we keep doing what you called us to do. So be with us now as we study together. I pray that this story of Lazarus will be a reminder, Father, as we look deep into what exactly you're doing as we prepare for this journey into Jerusalem, this journey to the cross that Jesus will take. Father, again, we are in such awe, and I'm so grateful for your power. I'm so grateful for your word. Father, more than anything, I'm grateful for your presence every single day. So be with us now as we open up your word. Make this time together what you want it to be. In Christ's name we pray. Amen. Right. It is good to be back. It's good to be studying. And you know what, over the last couple of weeks, I was thinking about it yesterday. I was kind of summarizing, getting ready for this morning. It truly is interesting to watch. Because we started all the way back at the wedding feast in Cana, where Jesus he turns the water into wine, and it was some awe about that, and some people saw and they were like, "Hey, that's pretty cool." And then there's other miracles they did that we didn't talk about every single one of them. But as you see those, you see Jesus, encountering the culture and encountering the norms that are taking place, and it begins to intensify when he challenges religious traditions. And see, we have to keep that in mind, because so many times when we study these confrontations that Jesus has with the Pharisees and the Sadducees, I think sometimes we forget that it's not the Roman government that he's taking on. It's the church that he's taking on. And so we have to keep that in mind, because there's also a word for us today, especially as we look at Lazarus. There's a word for us today. What things have we put in place as a church that we have made sacred cows, that we have made idols, just like the Pharisees did? It's easy to say, well, I'm not a Pharisee. Really? Think about it. The church that you go to, if someone suggested stopping doing something that that church had done, how angry would you be? And how quick would you be to say, well, this glorifies God, when really it's about, this is what I'm used to doing and I like this. And so Jesus begins to challenge that all along the way. And so the relationship with the Pharisees especially, continues to deteriorate. And it really comes to a head here because, we looked last week at the man born blind, and even the man born blind that was healed, he even caught on to, hey, this has never happened before. So how could you say that Jesus is not from God? And the Pharisees were still a little bit scared at that point to try to do anything. But the ante had been upped, right? He had laid it down in front of them. And he had said, look at this. I healed a man born blind. Nobody's ever done that before. And so we come to this story of Lazarus. And this is one of the most powerful. And this is, I said, this one becomes that pinnacle. This one becomes that straw that broke the camel's back, as we will see. Right? Because this is not just something that maybe you could write off as a magic trick. It's not something that you could write off as, maybe even something demonic, right? Because this is an encounter between life and death. And it's important to keep in mind, too, that when God created the world, when he put Adam and Eve in the garden, there's no indication that death was a part of the equation until the fall. And so what we see taking place here is that death is the final and ultimate enemy to mankind. We fear it. Maybe not so much the death itself, maybe how we'll die. We fear it because we're not sure about what's going to happen on the other side. Even as believers at times, I think we were, because we don't fully appreciate what heaven will be like when the new heaven and new earth come down. And that'll be a study for later, right? But all throughout this work in John, what John has been showing is that Jesus not only challenged community norms, he challenged church norms and the things within the church community and with the religious community and the structures that they had in place, right? The things that the Pharisees had put in place as far as checklists for the law, challenging all of that. But now we see in the story of Lazarus, Jesus taking on the final enemy, the ultimate enemy, taking on death and overcoming that. And yes, the story of Lazarus is a precursor. It is this hint towards what we will see in the death of Jesus, what will take place as Jesus dies. Because in both of the stories, it is the power of God moving to make it happen. It is the power of God and solely the power of God that brings it to completion. And it scares Pharisees to death, as we will see. So let's read this story. John chapter 11, beginning in verse 1. Now a certain man was ill, Lazarus of Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. It was Mary who anointed the Lord with ointment and wiped his feet with her hair, whose brother Lazarus was ill. So the sisters sent to him, saying, Lord, he whom you love is ill. But when Jesus heard it, he said, This illness does not lead to death. It is for the glory of God, so that the Son of God may be glorified through it. Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So when he heard that Lazarus was ill, he stayed 2 days longer in the place where he was. Then after this, he said to the disciples, Let us go to Judea again. The disciples said to him, Rabbi, the Jews were just now seeking to stone you, and are you going there again? Jesus answered, are there not 12 hours in the day? If anyone walks in the day, he does not stumble because he sees the light of the world. But if anyone walks in the night, he stumbles because the light is not in him. After saying these things, he said to them, our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I go to awaken him. The disciples said to him, Lord, if he's fallen asleep, he'll recover. Now Jesus had spoken of his death, but they thought he meant taking rest and sleep. Then Jesus told them plainly, Lazarus has died. And for your sake, I'm glad that I was not there so that you may believe, but let us go to him. Then Thomas, called the twin, said to his fellow disciples, let us also go that we may die with him. Now when Jesus came, he found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb 4 days. Bethany was near Jerusalem, about 2 miles off, and many of the Jews had come to Martha and Mary to console them concerning their brother. So when Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went and met him. But Mary remained seated in the house. Martha said to Jesus, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But even now I know that whatever you ask from God, God will give you. Jesus said to her, your brother will rise again. Martha said to him, I know that he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day. Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet he shall live. And everyone who lives and believes in me shall never die. Do you believe this? She said to him, yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, who's coming into the world. When she had said this, she went and called her sister Mary, saying in private, the teacher is here, and he's calling for you. And when she heard it, she rose quickly and went to him. Now Jesus had not yet come into the village, but was still in the place where Martha had met him. When the Jews who were with her in the house, consoling her, saw Mary rise quickly and go out, they followed her, supposing that she was going to the tomb to weep there. Now when Mary came to where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet, saying, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in his spirit, and he was greatly troubled. And he said, where have you laid him? They said to him, Lord, come and see. Jesus wept. So the Jews said, see how he loved him? But some of them said, could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man also have kept this man from dying? Then Jesus, deeply moved again, came to the tomb. It was a cave, and the stone lay against it. Jesus said, take away the stone. Martha, the sister of the dead man, said to him, Lord, by this time there'll be an odor, for he's been in there 4 days. Jesus said to her, did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God? So they took away the stone. Jesus lifted up his eyes and said, Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I said this on account of the people standing around, that they may believe that you sent me. When he said these things, he cried out with a loud voice, Lazarus, come out. The man who had died came out, his hands and feet bound with linen strips, and his face wrapped with a cloth. Jesus said to them, unbind him and let him go. Many of the Jews, therefore, who had come with Mary and had seen what he did, believed in him. But some of them went to the Pharisees and told them what Jesus had done. So the chief priests and the Pharisees gathered the council and said, what are we to do? This man performs many signs. If we let him go on like this, everyone will believe in him, and the Romans will come and take away both our place and our nation. But one of them, Caiaphas, who was high priest that year, said to them, you know nothing at all, nor do you understand that it is better for you that one man should die for the people, not that the whole nation should perish. He did not say this of his own accord, but being high priest that year, he prophesied that Jesus would die for the nation, and not for the nation only, but also to gather to one of the children of God who were scattered abroad. So from that day on, they made plans to put him to death. Wow. What a story, right? So much stuff here to unpack. So let's just kind of walk through the story and see what we have. First, you've got the death of Lazarus. We really don't know up until this point how Jesus became acquainted with Mary, Martha, and Lazarus. Okay, but we do know that Jesus was friends with them, and he thought highly of them. Now, Luke gives us a little bit different story of being in the house. Mary and Martha doing all the work, Mary sitting at Jesus' feet and coming to town. It's possible that that event took place prior to this, and that's where they became such good friends. Because one of the things that we know on a consistent basis through all the Gospels, you see that Bethany becomes sort of Jesus' stopping place. And maybe it's in one of their homes. Please don't assume that these are three people who never got married and lived together as a family. There's nothing that says that, okay? Because if you remember in the Luke story, I believe it says they're actually in the home of Simon, or maybe it's in the one we're getting ready to look at, right? But it is clear that they're siblings, but there's nothing to indicate that they all live together. But it's not unusual in these times that when the family gets together, do something, get together in one house. Like, when my family gets together, we go to my mother's house, we go to my dad's house, we go to grandparents' house. When Tammy's family gets together, usually get out together at her parents' house. They get together, and everybody's doing their thing. So we can't assume that they don't live separately, and even that they're not married. We just don't know that. Okay? Mary's probably the only one at this point that's not. Okay? But that's not the point. And see, that's one of the beauties about this particular story, is that we make it so much about Lazarus and Martha and Mary, but it's not. It's really not about Lazarus coming back to life. The story is about God's glory being shown through his son. And we have to start there as we think about it. So, there's these good friends, and it's obvious that they're good friends because when Lazarus gets sick, Martha and Mary send word to Jesus. So they have some idea of what he's doing, whether they just keep up with his itinerary or they just know. Maybe he says when he comes and goes, right, I'm going to be here in the next little while. I'm planning to go here. But they send for him because they want him to know. And I think there's certainly this assumption, because they've seen the things Jesus has done. They've heard the stories. They've seen how loving he is. And they just assume, right, if we say that Lazarus is sick, Jesus is going to come and he's going to heal him. But word gets to Jesus and he says, okay, but he waits 2 days before he goes. He waits 2 days, right? And he says when they come and tell him, this illness does not lead to death. It is for the glory of God, so that the Son of God may be glorified through it. He lays it out from the start what the purpose of this event is about. Again, it's truly not at a foundational level about Lazarus being raised from the dead. Nothing like that. It is about the Son of God glorified through it. Because again, this becomes that linchpin event. This becomes that cathartic moment where the Pharisees and the chief priests say, enough is enough. And it gives us an indication of just what God is willing to do to bring glory to himself, to effectuate the plan that he has in place to get us to that place in Revelation of everyone around the throne giving honor and glory and praise to him. And again, we see more about just the indication of just the relationship, like, because it says Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So when he's heard, he said, okay, but he stayed 2 days. After 2 days. And see, this is kind of cool because this is where we begin to see some angst in the disciples. Jesus says, around verse 7, let us go to Judea again. And the disciples are like, we were just there and it wasn't good. They were looking to stone you, right? It's funny because they don't ask him, why are we going to see Lazarus? All they hear is, we're going to Judea again, right? They were ready to kill you there because of the things you said and the things that you did. And you want to go back there? But Jesus said, and it's interesting how he puts it, are there not 12 hours in a day? I can remember when I was a kid growing up, and I would spend time with my dad in the summertime, especially. Dad worked construction, and he had a farm going on at the same time. And there was this expectation that, I would get up, my brothers would get up, sister would get up, and we would do things. We had chores around the farm. Some of it was just weeding, getting stuff done, feeding animals, picking when the time came. And Dad had to leave pretty early because he wanted to be on the job site pretty early. He wanted to work while it was still cool. He didn't want to work in the heat of the day. And he expected us to be up just as early. And I can remember as a kid griping about that. Why I got to get up so early? His thing was like wasting daylight. There's only so many hours in a day to get things done. Jesus is basically saying these to the disciples, look, y'all, the time is drawing short. There's not much time left. And there are things to do that are going to bring honor and glory to God. And so we need to do them now within the time frame that we have set, because God's got a timeline that we know nothing about. It's his completely. Jesus knows it. And that's why he's saying to the disciples, we got to go to Judea. Yeah, we do. We got to head that way. And the disciples are scared. And Jesus is like, but hey, we got to get this done. The disciples said to him, Lord, he's just fallen asleep, right? So why don't he'll be okay? He just fell asleep. So he just needs, just let him sleep it off. Jesus is like, no. Lazarus has died. And again, I'm sure some of them are thinking like, well, what can we do about that? Do we have to go be part of the mourning party? Jesus said, Lazarus has died. Verse 18, and for your sake, I'm glad I was not there, so that you may believe. But let us go to him. So he lays it down. And I love Thomas's statement here. All throughout history, we tend to demonize Thomas, for doubting and for wanting to put his hands in the scars and in the side of Jesus. But Thomas makes a very profound statement here. And this is not one of those cynical kinds of statements. There's nothing in there to indicate that he's being cynical at all. But what it does indicate that when Thomas says to his fellow disciples in verse 16, let us go that we may die with him. There's this hint, this indication that Thomas gets it, that something is coming, and that he has submitted himself to Christ as his follower, and he's willing to go. I'm reminded of the words of Isaiah. Here am I, Lord, send me. I'm not convinced that Thomas fully understood the extent to what Jesus was going to do, but he understood what Jesus had done up until this point, and that Thomas had surrendered to Jesus. Sure, he doubted, but he knew. Okay? I think Thomas is a good picture of you and me on a regular basis. There are times that we know in our journey with Christ that we understand the inevitable, right? We know what's coming, and we do it. And even when we see things happen, we still doubt at times. Really? Wow. Not quite sure I fully get that. Thomas was willing to go and lead his fellow disciples with him. So when they got there, they found out that Lazarus had been dead for 4 days. And it's interesting because he didn't go into the village and he didn't go straight to the house, but Martha, being Martha, came running out. And I love this encounter. I love this encounter with Mary and with Martha, because Martha goes running out. Lord, if you'd have been here, I know my brother wouldn't have died. And she's thinking, and I don't know if she's necessarily sniping at Jesus. I'm sure she's saying what any of us would have said there, And Jesus said, he will rise again in the resurrection, right? Jesus said to her, your brother will rise again. And Martha said, I know that he will, because, the Pharisees, and there was teaching in the temple that there was life after death. And Lord, I know he'll be there, and I know those things. And Jesus basically says to her, no, I'm talking about right now. I don't know that she fully gets it, but what Jesus says to her, he said, yeah, she said, I know he'll rise again in the resurrection on the last day. But then Jesus says to her, verse 25, I am the resurrection and the life. In the present tense, that ego eimi, I am the resurrection and the life. For right now, and not just physical resurrection in life, but spiritual resurrection in life. And see, that's a hint of where we're going with this Easter celebration, right? Because Jesus is saying, It's not just that when the end time comes and the dead are raised and we're spending time with God then and everything will be great and glory. There's an indication and an implication for life right now. John will go on to call it so that you may have life and have it more abundantly in the present tense. That's why it's so important. Like when we get into Ecclesiastes, we understand living now in light of eternity. What does that mean? Yes, there's resurrection at the end of time when Christ returns. Jesus says, I am the resurrection and the life now. Oh, and how we miss that sometimes. How we live in such misery at times. Struggling with wanting to enjoy life, but at the same time wanting to follow Christ. Why can't the two come together? And that's what we'll talk about in Ecclesiastes. But Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. Now, whoever believes in me, though he die, he'll live. Do you believe this? And I'm not convinced that Martha fully understood what he was saying, but she's like, okay, I do believe that you're the Christ. I got that. The other stuff's kind of hard. Jesus is okay with that. Then Mary comes. And such a beautiful story. Mary comes, and Mary, in her personality, being exactly who she is, falls at his feet. Lord, if you'd have been here, my brother would not be dead. And all these people are coming with Mary, and they're all crying, weeping, right? And it says when Jesus saw her weeping, and the weeping is not the right word. Okay. I think the NIV says crying or something of that nature. This is wailing, folks. I mean, this is, if you've ever, when you go through that kind of loss, Tammy and I can tell you exactly what it's like. When you've lost a spouse, when you've lost a parent, when you've lost a child, you know, a good friend or someone that was terribly close to you, this overwhelming sense of grief that just makes you wail. That's what Mary's doing. And all these other folks are doing the same thing. And I think it's interesting here to note some difference. You know, people have tried to say, well, these were hired mourners and that's what they're trying to do. I'm not convinced that this was a hired group, right? There was this expectation in Jewish life that mourning would take place for, you know, several weeks after a person had died. And it would be loud. It'd be peaceful kind of in the home, but there'd be, you know, be people outside. And yes, it was common to hire mourners if you didn't have enough people. But when you look at this passage around in verse 20, the Jews were with her in the house consoling her. Mary rose quickly. And it talks about early on in this passage where when Lazarus died, people just showed up. And it speaks more to who the three of them were and who their family was, that they had friends that would come. So I'm not convinced that these are paid mourners, but they're there with Mary crying and weeping. And now we get into one of the most discussed and controversial, I think, passages. Because Mary says in verse 32, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. When Jesus saw her weeping and the Jews who had come with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in his spirit and greatly troubled. And Jesus said, where have you laid him? They said to him, Lord, come and see. Jesus wept. So Jesus comes upon this scene, or these people come to him, and Mary's at his feet just crying, wailing. These friends of the family are there crying and wailing, and Jesus sees this. And it's easy to assume that when it says he was moved in his spirit and greatly troubled, and it's not the Holy Spirit, it's his spirit, it's his inner self. He is struggling, right, with what he sees. It makes him sad. But the word there about deeply moved is the word indignant. Okay? It's kind of like a horse snorting when they're trying to do something. Like, you know, if you've ever been around horses and they don't want to do something or they don't like what's going on, they give this snort and they raise their head, you know. It's also used in classical Greek to indicate rage and significant anger at what is going on. Yes, I think it's fair to assume that Jesus is sad because they're sad. He's not sad for Lazarus. No, because he knows what's about to happen. He's not sad for his brother, but he's sad when he sees the scene in front of him. He's not angry with Mary. He's not angry with the mourners. He's angry at sin and death. He's angry at what it has caused, that it has led to a place like this. And see, we need to recognize that. That's why he wept. He was not weeping necessarily for his brother Lazarus. He was weeping because of the pain and the angst and the lack of joy as a result of sin and death. We see that other places too. When he stands over Jerusalem up on the mountaintop saying, oh, Jerusalem, I wanted to gather you, but you didn't. And he's angry, not with the Jews necessarily, but with what sin has done to bring them to this place. And knowing that he's going to do something about it, but he's angry. And see, and we have to understand that God is that is exactly the way God is. He's angry with the sin that is taking place. He's angry with what it does to us, angry with the way that it makes us act. So that when we act less than godly on social media, when we say stupid things to other people, when we make idols of things that are not meant to be idols, when we separate ourselves from other people on baseless reasons like skin color and gender and things of that nature, he's angry because it is sin that has caused those types of responses. And it makes him sad. Right? It moves his spirit. And it should move ours. And so that's why he's crying. That's why he's upset. He knows that he can do. But I think what's beautiful about this, as just kind of an aside, is that when Martha comes to him, she's grieving in a different way. She's trying to explain and say the right things. And Mary comes and she's openly grieving and getting it all out. Jesus doesn't chastise either one of them. He doesn't even chastise the mourners in any way. He lets them mourn. He lets them cry. He lets Martha say the things that she needs to say. He enters into their sadness and their mourning with them, puts an arm around them, and says, I'm here now to comfort and to relieve and to cry with you. So often when people die, those of us that come around them, we want to say trite things. We want to give these statements and feel like we have to say something and do something. Jesus just let them, and he cried with them. One of the roles of the mourners when someone died in Jewish culture, they just came and sat in the house with them. That's it. They didn't do anything, didn't say anything, came and sat in the house with them. I'll never forget when David died. So many people came, and I'll never forget. And on like the second day, I think, or third day, sometime in there, my good friend Josh Kappas came down, and he was just here, and we were just kind of talking. And as he prayed that particular day, he referenced Jesus as Emmanuel, right? God with us. Jesus entered into their weeping and said to Martha, I am the resurrection and the life. right now. Not for a later time, but for right now. And that's a part of what Easter is about, is that God entered into our world himself through his son, Jesus Christ. Into the pain, into the suffering, into the sin, and is with us as we weep and as we mourn, giving us hope now. Resurrection hope now. Life now. So that in the midst of our pain, in the midst of our hurt, in the midst of our uncertainty, there is hope based on the resurrection. They don't fully understand. So you see what Jesus is doing as he moves towards Jerusalem? He is setting up God's plan so that we will see it and we will experience it. Then we see the resurrection of Lazarus being brought back to life. Jesus being moved again, went to the tomb. He said, take away the stone. And here he prays out loud, which was common in Jewish times. You know, Jesus even taught his disciples, you know, when you pray, pray this way, because they asked. But it was not uncommon for priests and other religious leaders to pray out loud, to give people a sense of, here's what you might say or the direction you might go in. Right? But it was a very personal prayer, right? Because for the first time, we hear Jesus refer to God as Father. That intimate Trinity relationship of Father and Son. And it's clear, too, that Jesus has prayed before, because what does he say? You and I talked about this. I know what you're doing here. But I'm saying it out loud. Why? So that everybody else around will hear and that you will be glorified. I'm convinced, and it's a study for another time, that Jesus never did anything here in his own divinity. He always prayed to God. So that God would be the one. And that's the mystery of the Trinity. Right? Because God came in human flesh as Jesus, fully God, fully man. But Jesus still praying to the Father and submitting to his Father's will. The Holy Spirit doing the same thing. That's the mystery of the Trinity, because it's God all three in one. He submitted to his Father. I said this on account that the people standing around, that they may believe that you sent me. He's like, I want them to know that in the midst of all this chaos, in the midst of all this mourning, that you sent me and that you're about to do this. And he said, Lazarus, come forth. Probably louder than that. Because the way that this is written in the Greek is demonstrative, it's loud, it's authoritative. Right? There's no questioning whatsoever, no doubt whatsoever in what Jesus is saying. Lazarus, come forth. And what happens? A man who died came walking out. They didn't mummify people like the Egyptians did. Okay. But they wrapped them pretty tight. And here's what's kind of cool, again, to kind of set up what we will see. Lazarus came out and he was bound up because they wrapped the person first from here down. And then they wrapped the head separately. You remember when the disciples go into the tomb, what do they find? That the head garment had been folded. So Lazarus comes out, and Jesus says, unbind him and let him go. Please don't ever, ever teach this again, that God has unbound you from sin. That is not what this is about. This is Jesus just saying, take that stuff off of him and let him get back to being a man. This is not about the release of sin. This is not about the release of anything that's holding on to you or any chains that you have. This is solely about God has reached in and breathed new life into Lazarus. And Jesus just says, take those clothes off of him, get that stuff out of there, get the reminders of death away, and let him go. And I'm sure the Jews are astonished because it's interesting here because when Jesus said, roll away the stone, they're like, God, you've been in there 4 days. He's going to stink. And that's a part of it. But another reason that the 4-day thing is there, and this is so important, right? And Jesus knew this when they came to him and said Lazarus was sick. Jewish custom also believed that when a person died, that person's spirit would linger for up to 3 days in hopes of re-entering the body. After the 3rd day, when decay began to set in and decomposition began to set in, the spirit would leave. Jesus raised Lazarus on the 4th day and said, take the grave clothes off of him, let him go back to being the man that I created him to be. Well, obviously this didn't sit well with the Pharisees. And they called a special meeting and pretty much sentenced Jesus to death. This is a powerful understanding here of what the Pharisees are so upset about. Look at what they say in verse 47. So the chief priests and the Pharisees gathered the council, the Sanhedrin. What are we to do? For this man performs many signs. Verse 48, 6, 8. My glasses aren't good. If we let him go on like this, everyone will believe in him, and the Romans will come and take away both our place and our nation. They really don't care what Jesus is doing or the effect that it has on the people. You see, Annas' group, that were the high priests, they had pretty much worked out a good deal, right? With Pilate and with Herod, sort of that Pax Romana thing. You know, we'll do our thing, you do yours. We won't cross you, and you don't. You say, you know, we won't cross you as Jews, and we'll submit to you and pay your taxes and do that kind of thing. And you let us do. And so, as a result, the Jewish leaders wielded a great deal of power over the people. And so what are they afraid of? That, you know, if these people begin to believe Jesus, because remember, Barabbas is already in jail for inciting insurrection, wanting to be released from Roman rule. But the Pharisees and the chief priests and even the Sadducees did not want to be released from Roman rule because they had it good. They had the power. History continues to show that when the church tries to be the government, or the government tries to be the church, it never works out well. Just like we have here. Because they are worried that, okay, this little peace agreement that we have set up with the Romans is going to be messed up. And what's going to happen? Because if all these people begin to believe Jesus, you're going to have some kind of insurrection. And the Romans are going to come and take away our place and our nation. Place can be understood as in 2 ways. And the wording is that way intentionally. Yes, the Romans will come in later and destroy the temple. They were worried about that because it was the center of Jewish life. But there's also an indication that they're talking about our place, our standing, our place of power and authority. They will come and take that away from us, and we won't be in charge anymore. And therefore, we won't have our nation anymore. They tied their nation as Jewish people to their authority and to the temple. And they were worried about losing that. But then Caiaphas says something And Caiaphas, he's the son-in-law of Annas, and they've been in charge. He's the high priest for about 15 years. And Annas had been for a little while until he'd gotten just in some trouble. But Annas' family had been in charge of the priesthood for probably Caiaphas' entire life. And it was a very corrupt priesthood, as history shows us. And we've talked about that stuff. But Caiaphas speaks mostly to condemn Jesus, to say, look, guys, okay, I understand. So we have a choice to make. We can either let him keep doing, or we can take him out. And he says something that's logical, right? That makes sense. But oh, wow, is prophetic. What does he say? You know nothing, verse 49. You know nothing at all, nor do you understand that it is better for you that one man should die for the people, not that the whole nation should perish. And John goes on to say, he did not say this of his own accord, but being high priest that year, he did. John goes on to say, Caiaphas really doesn't know what he's saying. He's making logical sense here. It makes more sense for us. If we want to keep control, if we want to keep power in the things that we're used to doing, it's better for us if we take our licks and kill Jesus. Because then we get to keep our power, we get to keep our nation, we get to be in charge of it, we continue to be in control of it, we continue doing the things that we want to do. So let's just take our lumps and take Jesus out, right? Oh, how prophetic. Because John points out quickly that Jesus is, that Caiaphas is saying exactly the reason that Jesus came. That one man take on the sin of his people, die on a cross, be buried, rise again in resurrection, ascend into heaven, fulfilling God's plan for salvation that would lead to our glorification with the new heaven and the new earth. Caiaphas had no idea what he was talking about on the bigger scale. He was just interested in keeping his position. But it's exactly what God wanted them to do. So verse 53 tells us, from that day on, they made plans to put him to death. All part of God's plan, falling right into place. This journey to the cross is reaching an apex. It's getting to that cathartic moment that it's time. And it goes on to say at the end of the chapter that Jesus no longer walked openly among the Jews, right, but returned by the way of the wilderness and things like that. Because the time wasn't just yet. And we'll see that when we talk next week, and you'll see that in the readings that we do. But the story of Lazarus, again, is not, it's not foundationally about Lazarus being raised from the dead and coming back to life. It's about the statement that Jesus made. I am the resurrection and the life. For now, right? Lazarus was able to come back to life and live many more years. He died again later on, yes. Right? The power and resurrection now in the present tense. You know, just like the Jeremy Camp song that says, the same power that rose him from the dead lives in us. That's the resurrection and the life that Jesus was talking about. I am now, present tense, the resurrection and the life. That same power is available and lives in us when we surrender our lives to Christ. And that's what he was trying to say and demonstrate to Mary and to Martha as they grieved and as they cried and as they wailed and as they tried to explain and understand. Jesus said, in your mourning, in your sadness, in your grief, I am the resurrection and the life. He's saying to us in everything that we do from day to day, in our work, in our school, in our communities, in our families, in our personal lives, I am the resurrection, and the life. And I came that you might have life and have it more abundantly. Right now, in the present. This is not a prosperity gospel. He's not talking about physical, monetary, house, boats, cars, money, things of that nature. But a joy that supersedes anything we've ever known. A joy that says God is with me in everything that I do. And when I surrender my life to Him, I can count on Him. Even when it's good, even when it's bad, I know that He is working it out for His glory. Jesus says, I am the resurrection and the life. Present tense. Father, thank you again for the power of your word. Thank you, Father, for the story of Lazarus and reminding us that you are the resurrection and the life, present tense. And I pray that as we continue this journey towards Easter, that we would begin to grasp that, Father, that we would find ourselves surrendering to you anew every single day, all that we are and all that we do. So that we might experience that power and that joy that only comes from the life that you give today, Father. Be with us as we move now towards times of worship, Father. Help us to worship in that truth today. In Christ's name we pray. Amen. Thank you so much. Have a great week. I love you all. Look forward to seeing you next week. And again, if you want those readings that I've put together, I'll be emailing those out later in the week. So please put your name and email address in the chat box. Thank you so much, and God bless.